Hello and welcome to our next lesson. This lesson we're going to be covering color theory, and just so you know, I am not an expert at color theory. In fact, there's like a whole courses in college dedicated just to color theory and color harmonies and things like that. What we're going to be covering today, these are just the basics, bare bones things that you'll probably learn in early college level, maybe late high school level art classes, and this is just to get a general understanding of color schemes, color harmonies, how they work, what they are. It is a ground zero level understanding of color theory, and this also has a lesson at the end, which we will then follow into a lesson next week on more in-depth color theories. But let's go ahead, get started with the lesson, and for the lesson we have a nice little presentation. Okay, color theory. What is color theory? Well, color theory is the idea behind how colors or certain colors look good together while others do not. And to first understand color theory, you need to understand color, and more precisely, a color wheel. At this point, I would assume that you've already made custom color wheels in my classes and you're pretty familiar with mixing and blending colors, which is good because that's what you need to do. Now, believe it or not, the first color wheel and color schemes that were first created and actually documented was from Isaac Newton. So yeah, the guy who is famous for coming up with the idea of gravity also was the first one to truly document color theory. Now, that is not entirely true, because we know that in the Renaissance time and even before Sir Isaac Newton, there was different color schemes and things that were very common to be used, but Sir Isaac Newton was the first one to actually put it down and turn it into a science and not just an art form. So what exactly is color theory? Well, color theory can be broken down into three separate categories of color. So color is not just the colors that you see on the color wheel. It has more of a three-dimensional aspect to it, kind of like XYZ values in a three-dimensional space where you have height, width, and depth. This is exactly the same thing, but with color. First, you have the values or lightness, and this is very simply just like the value scales that we covered way back in 6th grade, and we keep covering again in 7th and 8th grade. Value scales are how light or dark something is, and this can be any color whatsoever. Just like we see on this diagram right here, the light or darkness going from white, which is 10, all the way down to black, which is 0. Now, you do not just apply this to white, you apply this to every other color that you can come up with. For instance, the hue, which is next, is simply just the color itself. So for instance, red, yellow, green, all of those are hues. In other words, it's the color that you are referring to. So that is in the round plane that you see right here. Now, the final part of understanding how colors work is the color saturation, also known as the chroma, or also known as the color intensity. And that is this little pie, little cutout shape that you see right here. Basically, the more intense the saturation, the chroma, or the intensity of the color is, the brighter the color is. Not necessarily the whiter it is, but the more vibrant the color is. So as high as the color can go, let's say it's up here at a 12 in that blue, that means that it is as blue as it could possibly be. Now, if you dilute this or make the saturation go down, then you're going to see that it is slowly getting duller until you get to a gray. And that is the three different variations of colors that you have for every single color. Every color can have a wide aspect of colors that go into just that one single color. So as you can see here, this blue has lots of blues that are technically the same hue, but different variations of values and saturation. So, what does this mean for color groups or harmonies? Now, this is where the term color theory comes in practice, because color groups, which are also known as color harmonies, are color schemes that work together. So, how many color groups actually exist? In reality, there's hundreds of them, but for the purpose of this lesson, we are only going to be focusing on 5, and these are the top 5 basic, most simple color groups or color harmonies that are available. The first is called monochromatic, second is complementary, third is split complementary, fourth is analogous, and the last one is triatic. First, let's look at monochromatic. So as I mentioned to you previously, you can have a very wide variation of exactly the same color or hue. This is an example of a red hue, and you have all of the different variations of lightness and different variations of saturation going on inside of this one set of colors. Using this and only this hue, if you were to create an artwork, you would create something that is monochromatic. So monochromatic means just one color. For instance, that very same color was used to create this artwork. And if we just bounce this back and forth, you can see the different color variations that go into a monochromatic color scheme, as you see here, and you see that there. Exactly the same colors. It's one hue that has different variations of lightness, darkness, and saturations added to it. This is another example of a monochromatic color scheme. This uses the same color of blue, just different variations, saturation, and lightness, as this. So next is complementary color schemes. A complementary color scheme is a color scheme that is opposite each other on the color wheel. For instance, yellow and violet or purple, those two are opposite each other on the color wheel. So you would just use variations of those two colors, just like orange and blue, red and green. Now typically whenever you're looking at color schemes like this, there's usually one dominant color and the other color is more of an accent color. For instance, you can see this. The dominant color in this is green. Green is everywhere. You see greens in the background, and you see greens in the woman's dress, and you see green in the trees, and over here in the shadows on the armor. And then you have the complementary color of red, and those are the accents. You see her red hair, the red horse, the red on the leather, and the red drapery behind her. All of that is complementary colors, where you have one main color and then you have another color that just adds a little bit of an accent to it. You can also see that in both Vincent van Gogh's self-portrait on the left and Claude Monet's painting of a haystack on the right. These are dominant colors with blue, with the complementary colors of red added to it on both of them, with the red being an accent and the blue being the dominant color. Now you also see very commonly a complementary color scheme in a lot of kid-oriented or child-oriented mascots. For instance, Blippi in more recent years is a YouTube influencer, I suppose you can call him, for small children. And then you also see Spyro the Dragon, if you want to take it back to the late 90s, early 2000s, targeted towards kids as well. Next is split complementary color. And what a split complementary color is, it's basically a complementary color scheme, except the colors on either side of it, you pick one of the colors and you take the colors next to it. So for instance, a complementary color scheme would be red and green, but a split complementary color scheme would be red and green blue and yellow green. It's basically the same kind of color scheme that you can get with a complementary color scheme with the same kind of effect, except you get more color variation to it. So it's very similar to a complementary color scheme. And this is an example. If it really pushes a complementary color scheme, and you can see how they could be complementary, but just that little split between the orange and the red orange against that teal makes that a split complementary color scheme. It gives you a little bit more variation, but still has that pop of contrast that the complementary color scheme will give you. And the same thing with this split complementary color scheme. You have a dominant color with the blue, but then you also have the red in the woman's hair, as well as the orange with the highlight of the magic that's going on with the book. And another one here where you have the dominant greens and blues, and then you have the flip variation of the red for the skin tone. That is a split complementary color scheme. Next, we have an analogous color scheme. This, very simply, is colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. Typically, this can be 3 to 4. You can have 2, but when you verge on just 2 colors, you are really pushing the boundaries of a monochromatic color scheme. That's why a lot of people use 3 to 4. It gives you more color variation and it doesn't limit you as much as, say, a monochromatic color scheme. And that is analogous. Analogous is 3 to 4 colors next to each other on the color wheel. So for instance, Vincent van Gogh's color scheme on the left, you can see that there is greens with kind of a blue-green, which leads into more of an orangey type color as it fades over into the red-blue somewhere around there. And it gives you a nice analogous color scheme. You also have the same thing going on with Claude Monet's artwork on the right of the lily pads, where you have the blues and the purples and the greens. Now we also have this artwork which has the reds, kind of pink magentas, and the purples, also close to each other on the color wheel. The final one that we're going to look at is called a Triatic color scheme, and this basically equilateral triangle made out of the color wheel. So you could do this with the primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. You could also do this with the secondary colors like we have here with orange, purple, and green. There's lots of different variations you can do with this, but it's an equilateral triangle that you can just pick the colors around the color wheel. So for instance, this is a triadic color scheme using the primary colors with reds back here in the trees, yellows with the lights, and blues with the sky and the water on the side. This is another triadic color scheme. This one shifted a little, not the primary colors, however, it is the tertiary colors next to the primaries. You also see this a lot in comic books as well as video games, because the 3 colors, a triadic color scheme, typically works really well together to give the appearance or the feeling of something being well-rounded, because you have different color schemes from different areas over the color wheel that work together, which gives you the overall feeling that there's a deeper character, but it's also a very well balanced character. That's why you see it a lot in comic books, for instance with Superman's design and a lot of other designs that you may see in the Marvel Comics or DC Comics universe. Whenever you are designing a character, you either are going to stick with typically a triadic color scheme, a monochromatic, or a complementary. Which brings me to your assignment. What are you going to be doing? Well, you are going to be creating a total of 3 different harmonies, and you're going to be using these with coloring book pages. Now you can use coloring pencil, marker, watercolor, crayon, or you can even do them digitally. I have these artworks saved in the Google Classroom. You can go there, download them, do them digitally if you want to, or you can do them live in person. It's entirely up to you if you'd rather do it traditional Up to you. Now, each artwork needs to be a different color scheme. And yes, I did say that I would like you to create 3 of them. So that means that you have your options of either doing a monochromatic, complementary, split complementary, analogous, or triatic. You can pick any of those 3 that you want to do using a different color scheme for each one. By the end of this, I'm hoping that you can better understand color schemes, and that will greatly help us whenever we go into our next lesson, which is going to be next week. All right, thank you all very much. If you have any questions for me, please let me know. And as always, thank you for joining me. Have a great rest of your day, guys.